Hey everybody, I'm here with Gabriel Bianconi, the co-founder and CEO of TensorZero. Hey Gabe, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Gabe, tell me a little bit about what TensorZero does.
Very high level, we're building a feedback loop for LLM applications. So we have this open source project that helps you take production data and use that to improve your prompts, your models, your inference strategies, and so on, so that your LLM application as a whole is getting better and better over time. Kind of like if you have a new employee tackling a job and getting better through experience, try and error, instruction, and so on, enabling the same for LLMs.
Can you dive into that a little bit more and explain it to me? So, I've heard of other tools that do like focus on the evals and stuff. Did you guys focus on that? Is it different? Paint me a picture.
Yeah, I would say the main difference here is that a lot of tools are building very specific point solutions to different factors here. So for example, very good observability or the best in class fine-tuning API or the best in class, let's say, eval tool like you mentioned. But the challenge with this is that at the end of the day, you're going to have to use 20 of those tools to actually put together the whole feedback loop. So the challenge is that those tools weren't really designed to work well with each other. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have to do a bunch of ETL work at each step of the way. You kind of like lose a little bit of like data or fidelity, or you need. So for example, your observability tool doesn't collect exactly the data you want for optimization. Once you optimize something, your experimentation tool might not understand the nuances of LM specifically. So you kind of end with like a pretty suboptimal solution. So with TensorZero, we kind of have like an end-to-end unified solution that has all the, let's say, central defaults to put this in place. And then if you need to complement it with, for example, like a more specialized eval tool or something else like that, you can also bring something external, be it proprietary or third-party tool on top of this, let's say, foundation that we provide.
Awesome. So I saw you guys are open source. So how does deployment work? Are you guys doing something on site, or is it primarily people are just getting the product, downloading the product, and putting it in their own data center?
So right now it's fully open source. Down the road, we'll come back with a managed service that complements the product, and I can talk about that in a little bit. But for now, fully open source in the sense that like we're just focused on building a best-in-class developer tool. Luckily, you have plenty of runway, and investors are very aligned, and we believe in the vision here. So we really just want to build something that works very well with people. Talk to them to also get feedback and iterate on like making the product a lot more mature. So that's what we're focused on right now. That said, we try to work with companies as closely as we can in an informal way. So we get this like feedback signal from them. So we get, let's say, feature requests, or hey, like this error is not clear, or like couldn't find this in the docs. So we still try to get this pulse from customers, but like you said, it's open source. People can download it and use it and never talk to us if they don't want to.
Very cool. So tell me a little bit about the founding story. Why did you guys decide to build this company?
Yeah, so I started building this with my co-founder Viraj. The way we landed on this idea, so Viraj was in December finishing his PhD in machine learning, and towards the end of it was doing research in this, let's say, general area, like different ways to like learn, like to like train LLMs in like a more efficient way, using this like feedback signal and effectively like a reinforcement learning philosophy. So he was actually giving me like a practice talk for his PhD thesis defense, and then towards the end we kind of like landed on this like general topic. And after that, we're like, hey, maybe there's something to build here. We've all worked with LLMs. Like we're not, let's say, satisfied with the state of tooling today. Like obviously people are trying to build all sorts of like different things and some pretty interesting things, but we don't think it's solved yet. So I think there's room here to build this feedback loop, which is what we felt was missing. So we talked to a bunch of companies. We like played with like benchmarks we built ourselves and kind of landed on this final design. We then started building this around February of this year, spent the next few months, let's say, heads down building. We're both technical, so we're just kind of like coding for a while. Then over the summer, we ran a pilot of a voice agent startup. The workflow there then, for example, is like imagine like calling an insurance company, all driven by LLMs to get information about a patient. We kind of run a pilot with them where like they use TensorZero to first optimize a single model, then the whole system, and eventually everything that they do with AI. And by the end of the summer, the engineers were able to kind of like boost their agent's performance by like over 60%. So that worked very well. So that got us very excited. Up to that point, it was kind of like still like a managed service, kind of a black box, like hands-on approach. But that's when we started talking to more companies thinking about like how to think about distribution for TensorZero. That's when we landed on open source. I think given the scope of the product where it touches inference, observability, optimization, experimentation, and so on, it's challenging for it to be just like a black box managed service, vendor lock-in, and so on, which I relate. And if I were to buy, I would have the same concern. So that was the idea. Okay, let's build this as like an open source project where we can give out the foundations and later come back to those complementary, let's say, other products that like kind of make it more powerful, especially in the context of larger, let's say, enterprise customers.
That's awesome. You guys are relatively young, right? Started the company in December, started building in February, but you've raised some money from great investors. Why are they so excited?
Yeah, I think like our investors kind of resonated with this view of like solving the product in like a cohesive end-to-end way. They see a lot of those like point solutions that people don't think are very defensible. The challenge here, like from the perspective of a buyer, is that hey, like, am I gonna invest so much into like a point solution for, let's say, best in class ROHF or best in class this, and I don't know what's going to happen to my company in the next 6 months. Like maybe I get more data, or if there's a new feature, if there's a product need, and so on. I don't know what's going to happen to the market. Like every other week there's something new in AI. Like I don't know if, like, for example, ROHF or something else is going to be relevant in 2 years. Maybe it is, maybe not. So I don't want to kind of like fully bet on like a very specific solution. But kind of TensorZero is like almost like the Switzerland of all this, in the sense that we're like very agnostic, very empirical, and you're not committing to a specific thing. We're kind of giving you the foundation to try all those different things. We plug into different services. We provide tools ourselves, so you get to like taste and see what works for you, but you're not fully committing to a specific vendor, to a specific technique, to a specific model, and so on. So I think that resonated, especially like larger customers, customers that have more complex deployments, and I think that eventually kind of trickled down to like talks to investors. Luckily, we were able to recently, about like 2 months ago, close our seed round, and now looking to grow the team.
Nice. So talk to me a little bit about this idea. So AI field is moving super quickly. New things are coming out all the time. And you might kind of mention this, right? So how do you build your product in a way that can kind of take advantage of the new things coming and doesn't pigeonhole you into what's already there?
Yeah, I'll say there's both like a philosophy on like how we think about LLM engineering and the product, and like some like technical challenges that allow us to do that. I would say if I had to like summarize this into like one thing, is that we take a broader look into like what it means for LLM, like what an LLM engineering, sorry, what an LLM application looks like. A lot of people think about LLMs as like the boundary between LLM and application as like the prompts and the generation. So an application sends a prompt to a model, and the model spits out a generation that is used somehow. And for TensorZero, we try to take a broader look where we define schemas for the variables that are coming in and out of those models, and whatever happens inside, if actually dysfunctionally, variables in and variables out, which could be templating into a prompt, using a model, or even something more complex, that is fair game for us to like swap out. So with this different, broader interface, we have a lot more flexibility, but also a lot of guarantees on like the types of things that are coming in. We have a lot more structure in the data, which then allows us to do some interesting things. We can, for example, retroactively and counterfactually like swap out prompts when optimizing. We can have built-in inference time optimizations like dynamic and context learning and so on. We can have like setups where there are like multiple models trying to solve a task. And in doing all this, we can have also best-in-class observability, built-in experimentation, and all sorts of things like that. So this allows us to have like this pretty, let's say, agnostic and pretty, let's say, empirical approach to LLM engineering, where let's find out what works for you and not like kind of get in the way of your application.
So tell me a little bit about what the company looks like right now. How many people are you? What's this team look like?
Yeah, so as of today, it's just me and my co-founder. We actually just this morning signed someone else. So there's this candidate who he's like a postdoc at Columbia in machine learning. Previously did his ML PhD at Oxford as well. Like very accomplished as a researcher, who's joining us probably in January or like very early next year. But roughly what we're thinking here is that now that we raised, we want to build a team and probably bring around like 6 or so people. This is like a 2-2-2 or so split between more front-end oriented people, more back-end oriented people, which is Rust for us, and then more machine learning oriented people like this candidate.
So tell me a little bit, what was your pitch to this candidate? Why is TensorZero a great place to work?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. I think this philosophy, or like kind of looking at LLM engineering from the lenses of reinforcement learning, was very interesting from like an academic or intellectual perspective. I think the idea of building open source software was also really appealing. This is like a candidate that is really passionate about, like, let's say, publishing software papers and so on. So I think this is the right company if you have that sort of mindset. I think for us, we're not trying to just build like a very, let's say, short-term, narrow solution. We're thinking about like the broader, longer-term picture of like, what do you think LLM engineering is going to look like, not only today, but in 2 and 5 and beyond that, like years and beyond that. So I think those are like some of the factors there. I think it helps that like a lot of the like, technical challenges we have to tackle were very interesting to this candidate, and people have a lot of autonomy here. Like we try to be collaborative and teach and learn from each other and so on. But like I think our philosophy is that like people should have kind of like the flexibility and autonomy to like run with projects themselves.
Can you talk to me about some of those technical challenges? Like what are you most excited about in terms of what's ahead of you in terms of like the technical stuff you're working on?
Yeah, I'll talk on like the three different buckets I talked about, so it's like relevant for all sorts of profiles. First, on the front end side, we also want to build a dashboard or control plane that is also open source and ships with the product. So the product today is fully programmatic. Think of it like a database, which makes it powerful in the sense of like easy to scale and orchestrate and like customize and all sorts of things like that. But at the same time, realistically, kind of like a pain in the ass at times for like ad hoc workflows for like R&D and different points like that. So I think it would be a lot more powerful if it comes with like this kind of control plane that helps with the ergonomics of using this. So for observability, you're not running SQL queries. You can see the charts and so you can see the data at the very micro or like very macro level. For optimization, you're not, let's say, running scripts or calling APIs and so on. You can like launch jobs through this neat graphical interface and a number of other things like that. Let's say AI assisted workflows. So I think that kind of like summarizes into, let's say, better ergonomics for the product. I also think that for LLM engineering specifically, there's just so much going on, and especially in a product like this, that it's not realistic for people to like really know all the features and nuances and tricks and so on. So I also see the dashboard as a good way for like developer education. Can we surface the right things given your data, given what's happening, in a kind of proactive way? Like, hey, like given what you've tried or like the things you set up, your functions, like this is what you should do on next, or maybe try this. So I think it's like two sides of the same coin, with like both ergonomics but also education. I kind of see that like complementary to each other. So I think that's very powerful as well. So we're excited to kind of bring on some like talented front-end folks who work on this. On the backend side, which is the bulk of what we've built today in Rust, a number of features there to build as well. For example, better experimentation. Right now we have like straightforward A/B tests, so a lot more we can do. And like, how do you actually, once you have a model or like a new prompt or something else, even if it looks good in a vacuum, is it actually driving changes to your metrics or KPIs or behaviors that you care about? How do we evaluate that? Adding support for more types of models. Right now we're fully focused on like the vanilla text models. Soon we want to add support for images, voice, embeddings, other different things like that. The built-in inference time optimization. So a lot of research coming out of academia right now on like how do you spend more tokens and more compute at inference time to have smarter models, kind of like the OpenAI O1 style where the model thinks well and then finally spits the answer. We have some of those already, but plenty more we want to build in and kind of make it kind of like package it so people can like use it out of the box and they don't need to go hire like a RL or ML PhD to like read those papers and figure out. They can just like leverage it with TensorZero. And then finally, like the last bucket is this like machine learning, which work very closely with the other two to kind of from like this huge amount of research coming out, I figure out like what are the things that are interesting to like kind of package and like make it very neat as a developer tool. And then second, like how do we create benchmarks and so on to make sure those things work? If we change something, how do we actually make sure that, for example, experimentation, like I mentioned earlier, how do we make this in like a robust and statistically significant way, and so on. We think about this as like pretty cross-functional, like they all will have to work very closely with each other, but like bringing kind of like very diverse experiences.
Random question, but why'd you guys choose to do it in Rust?
I would say for performance and correctness. Most of the tools we see today, especially in the context of LLMs, are in Python and sometimes in TypeScript. That said, a lot of those tools struggle, especially the ones that are, let's say, in real time, in production, in the hot path, struggle to scale. So when we talk to larger companies, a lot of them very practically say, oh, like, does this add latency? How does this scale? Can this handle X thousand users at the same time and so on? And as soon as you say Rust, all of them are like, oh yeah, perfect. Like, don't even have to talk more about this. Rust is incredibly fast. When we benchmark this against other tools, it's orders of magnitude faster. So we're very happy with it. Rust also has a lot of benefits in terms of correctness. And since we're, let's say, both something that's like very critical in terms of like critical infrastructure, but also like plug into like so many external dependencies, like different model APIs, tools, and so on, like Rust kind of gives us assurance that whatever we do is more correct. We can like reason more effectively about them. So we can also iterate with a lot more confidence that we're not breaking things. And by doing this every now and then, we even catch, for example, regressions on like APIs from like the major model providers and some other nuances like that we can handle pretty gracefully.
That's cool. Yeah, I've never heard of like the tool choice or the programming language choice is actually almost marketing. That's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
tell me, I want to learn a little bit about your culture. And given you guys are pretty small, one way I like to think about culture for a really small team is it takes on the personality of the founders. So tell me about you and your co-founder and what you guys care about and your values and how that's translating to how you're building the company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think culture for us is something that's going to evolve over time as we bring in more people. And I think early team members will be kind of partial or like defining the culture. I I think the way we think about it today is that first, we really care about the quality of the craft, meaning that this is open source. We cannot ship slop. Like we have to build it the right way, not in a way that's correct today, but correct like in the long term, in a way that like survives the test of time. So you have to be extra thoughtful. What is correct? What works not just for us, but for like all sorts of developers out there running all sorts of workflows, all sorts of let's say applications, and all sorts of contexts. I think second for us is kind of trying to build something that is practical in the near term, but also having kind of this like longer view of like what is LM engineering not right now, but like what could it look like in 2-5 years, and like how do we build so like for that scenario as well. We try to be pretty autonomous and pretty collaborative with each other in the sense of like as much as possible when we're like brainstorming and like some of like the more ambitious features and so on, we'll like collaborate and brainstorm ways to do it and criticize each other's specs and do code reviews and so on. But people will have the autonomy to kind of like run with like a pretty large idea and take ownership and implement it themselves. I think kind of in line with like a lot of open source projects out there. So this is something we really care about. I think more informally, like my co-founder and I have been friends for over a decade now, and we've worked together in the past. So also pretty informal, pretty friendly workspace. Or now, obviously, things will change as we have more people, but we encourage this sort of, let's say fun, working hard, but working in a healthy, let's say, long-term oriented environment.
Yeah, I saw that on your website and I really liked that idea. It's like, look, we're working hard, but we're doing it in a healthy long-term way. Can you explain that a bit? Like, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, I would say for a lot of startups, obviously you have to work hard, and it's not going to be, let's say, a easy 9 to 5, chill, like, let's say, rest and best sort of job. But we're building a project that we think it's going to take several years to realize itself. I think especially open source projects often have like a longer time scale. A lot of the very successful open source projects, they're not, let's say, overnight successes. They're like decade-long like efforts. So we have to think under this kind of mindset. So we're building like a 10-year, let's say, mindset here, not like a 1-year mindset, which means that, yes, we have to work hard. We have to make progress. The field is moving fast, so it takes a lot of work there. But we shouldn't like burn out and like kind of crash 6 months from now. We have to like survive those 10 years. Especially, I think also in context with the team, like people have all sorts of like lifestyles and needs and so on. So like we want to create like an environment where people are able to like do their best work, contribute, but do that in a way that's like long term, not something that like they work very hard for 6 months, a year, and so on, and then kind of burn out and have to like churn and go somewhere else.
That makes sense. And in terms of just the values in general, you had a few on your site. If you had to just pick one that is kind of like the most important to you, like what would that be?
I would say the quality of the craft is something we really care about. It's like, how do you build something that is not slop? It's like, it's correct. It's, let's say, long-term oriented. It's thoughtful, but like how could like different users like do this? So like being very thoughtful is like how you think about this, both in terms of like code, in terms of like product, in terms of like vision, like building something that's like very cohesive long term.
How do you think about that in relationship to the field moving fast? There's all sorts of people building stuff too, and you feel like you're kind of probably on a race against time as much as you're trying to build a long-term company. So how do you balance those two things of moving really quickly, but also making sure that you're building something of high quality?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of like first prioritization. Like obviously there are all sorts of things that come out all the time. So like how do we pick the things that are like crucial and like the most important things that we have to get right? And then kind of making a distinction of like what are the things we absolutely must get right, like if we do it, like the interfaces between application LLMs and the ways we store data, the data model, like things like that we got to be extra careful, and the things that we can be a little bit looser in the sense of like, hey, if this let's say this optimization or this technique goes away next month or next year, we can deprecate that more easily, or we can like come in with something else. I think, yeah, there's like prioritization of like what even makes the cut, and even within what makes the cut, kind of like what is like absolutely crucial versus like what we can be a little bit looser.
How do you think about prioritization? Because I got to imagine, like right now, I mean, every day there's something new coming, and I'm sure, as a company that's building on top of a lot of this stuff, it can be distracting. So how do you maintain your focus? How do you maintain your prioritization? Make sure that you're not running in 20 different directions at once.
Yeah, but I think for us is to really trying to understand like what is actually moving the needle for companies. There's all sorts of tools, all sorts of techniques, and new neat things and tricks and so on. But at the end of the day, a lot of the time, like the field is moving fast, but not that fast. And so like the fundamentals are roughly the same on like a month-to-month basis. Like the key idea here is like, how do we think about this in like a very, let's say, robust and very thoughtful way? Like what should LLM engineering look like and what is missing out there? And build tools for those workflows. The workflows don't change that often, or at least shouldn't change that often. What really changes here is like the model of the month or your prompt or like the exact inference strategy or something like that. But like, the overall mentality and philosophy is not something that evolves that quickly, or at least it shouldn't.
That makes sense. So I want to talk about selecting talent. So how you think about bringing people onto your team. What are the qualities that you're looking for? Maybe the top one or the top two?
Yeah, I think the way you think about this is that we want people that we can learn from and also teach. So people that come with like one skill set that they're like very, very strong at. They don't necessarily need to be an expert on LLMs, for example. They might be like a very strong Rust engineer or like a very talented, let's say, React engineer or something else. But it kind of have this ability to be able to share and teach and collaborate, but also taking the feedback and kind of learn from others and become more cross-functional. I think this is something that like me and my co-founder kind of had to deal with. We're not Rust people, like we're more machine learning people, but we had to learn Rust for the job. We learned, and now we're like learning some front end, and there's always something new to learn. So I think it has to be someone who's like excited to both learn and teach. And then second, someone who can like really empathize with like their users. And it helps that the users is also auto engineers. So how can you build something that is very good, like as a user, I would love to use. So building best-in-class tooling, thinking about documentation, developer experience, and all sorts of things like that.
Are you looking for people that have startup experience already, or are you open to kind of all of the like, people that are bigger tech companies?
I think it's helpful, but I wouldn't say it's a hard requirement. The one thing I do like to see though is kind of like a 0 to 1 experience. That 0 to 1 experience could be in the context of a larger organization. For example, have they driven a new product or a new project from like inception all the way to like production, or even outside of work, like for example, have they worked on an open source project where they launch something and it doesn't necessarily have to be popular or anything like that, but it shows, let's say, consistent effort from, let's say, brainstorming something all the way to like shipping into, let's say, production grade sort of software. So I wouldn't say it's a requirement. Often, I would say it's aligned with some of the values and skills we want to see, but it's not like a hard rule.
So how do you guys test for this kind of stuff? Like, what does your interview process look like, and how are you extracting this idea that you can learn from them, or these kind of things?
Yeah, the interview process across all three, let's say, roles or like backgrounds is we typically do, let's say, a more informal like, intro call with either me or my co-founder Viraj. There, it's more about like understanding both your background, your skills, and your interests and long-term goals, as well as for us like share more about the company, answer questions you might have like product, team, technology, working with us, and so on. After that, we do 2 virtual technical screens. Those like 1 hour long technical screens. Those are very dependent on your background. So we try to tailor them very specifically to, like, let's say, the skill sets and backgrounds we're looking for. So for example, in the context of like a front-end role, the first technical screen is let's build a component in React. Let's say it's pretty manageable for like something an hour, but let's build something that's like very thoughtful, like and very punctual, but in React using the tools you'd use in the job. The second technical screen for front-end would be something more in, let's say, user experience, product design, like more a discussion like technical considerations of building, let's say, a very complex AI, let's say, data-heavy product. And then the final one, then we do like a final round, is typically like a 3-hour, let's say, on-site round where we actually work with the candidate on like, hey, here's like, imagine we're building this feature or this like tiny little product. Let's actually build it, like use the tools you're used to, go use Google, whatever it takes, but let's build something in those like 3 hours that like actually makes progress here. For the other 2 roles, it's pretty similar, but like tailored to that. There could be Rust, there could be machine learning. We'll build different sorts of things, but that's how we think about it. So it's all revolved around building and kind of being thoughtful about like why you're building this and how it fits the larger picture. It's not like the very traditional, let's say, lead code style interviews where we're asking like a very specific algorithmic questions. Some of those interviews, especially for example in backend and machine learning, it might involve some form of like data structured algorithms and so on, but those are generally more open-ended and for the sake of like solving a larger problem, not for the sake of like the algorithm in a vacuum. And I think that reflects kind of both the role and how we like think, like some of like the qualities we want to see in the candidates.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So how do you think about, you mentioned that people can use the tools they're used to. So can they use like AI in the interviews, or how does that work for you guys?
Depends on the interview. Towards the end of the process, we're, let's say, more and more flexible. What we do right now, and this is something we're experimenting a little bit, so it might change, is that for the technical screens, it's like a no AI, but yes to Google and documentation. So if you forgot like, I don't know, like CSS class or whatever, just Google it. Let's get through this. For the final round, like if you want to use cursors, like some form of code completion, that's also fine with us. But no, like I think for some use cases, like you can try to like one shot like a large project with like AI models where they're writing let's say hundreds of lines of code at once and like stitch them together. I think that's something we try to avoid. Not because like that's not part of the job. Like sometimes it is, but also like sometimes it's not because like the AI can't do it, and then you have to be able to understand the fundamentals of like why does it work like that and so on. So we try to like kind of like balance it out where you can use some of the tools, but like not let's say fully hands off, so you actually know like what you're able to do.
That's fair. Yeah, I remember I've been putting some Elasticsearch queries in and just kind of one-shotting them and trying to see if they work and then throwing them back out. And I have no idea what the actual query language is, so I can understand that in some ways.
No, exactly. I think even in a situation like that, then the way you think about it is like let's talk about it. Like why did it output that, and like why does it work, or like if it works, like when wouldn't it work? Right. So I think it's helpful to have that discussion around it then, where you're not writing from scratch, but at least the person like understands what's going on.
So talk to me a little bit about, you've seen some candidates so far, are there ways that candidates can stand out and look really good in the process?
I think actually trying the product. It's open source, it's a developer tool, so go read the docs, go form questions, like try to figure out like where would you use it for. Obviously, we don't expect you to like be familiar with like the API formats and the config and so on and actually know how to use it, but like try it out, like try the quick start. You can probably do that in like 5-10 minutes, like play with some tutorial, like try some of the examples and come up with like actually like very deep questions, like how does it work, why does it work, why is it not that, and so I think that shows both curiosity but also shows like they're like very eager to learn, and this is like one of the qualities we look for.
Last question, as you think about 2025, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think for us it's like this big transition period, like just like me and Viraj working together to like now working like the broader team, which give us like more bandwidth to like work on like bigger, more ambitious projects and so on. So very excited to build a team, very excited to bring more people on board and kind of start to define like what does TensorZero look like, not as me and Viraj, but also as like a larger organization. So excited to collaborate with people.
Actually, one last question. Any hot takes on like startups, hiring, building your company as you've been doing this for a year or so?
Let's see, some hot takes. I think recruiting, like a lot of companies only think about it from this perspective of the company and not the perspective of the candidate. I think a lot of candidates use the interview process as a way to assess the companies themselves. So you want to make the recruiting process both respectful of their time, but also challenging, exciting, interesting. So we try to make those problems that I talked about, things that are kind of related to the job so they get a flavor for what they're working on, make them pretty challenging in the sense of like, it's not, let's say, fizz buzz or something straightforward. It's something like, let's work on something hard, let's learn, let's struggle a little bit, let's have like some back and forth, let's collaborate. We try to make them also open-ended in the sense of like, there are answers where you could hopefully do in half an hour to an hour. So with them could probably take like several weeks. So let's figure out like what we can do. And when we're done with like the interview, like what is ahead of us? Like if we had like 2 months to solve this, like how could we have done this instead? And I think personally, that's what I would want to see to kind of get a flavor, like how do they work? Like what do they work on? Like what would I be doing in the job? But also kind of have this idea that like, no, like this company was like thoughtful from all the way from scheduling, all the way to like how to run those interviews, that I think translates pretty well to like the experience of working at the company.
That makes a lot of sense. It's crazy to me how much, as a candidate, you're basically making a decision where you're going to spend 40 hours of probably most of your waking hours every day.
Yeah.
And of course you want to, learn from the company and stuff. And I feel like not enough companies think about it that way. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. This was really awesome hearing about TensorZero. Thanks for your time.
No, absolutely. Thank you.